Good afternoon. My name is Dustin Dupas, Chief Operating Officer at Tabs Analytics. Welcome to the 2018 Tabs Wine and Liquor Study webinar. We'll be covering key consumer, channel, and product trends across 11 types of red and white wines and 8 types of liquor. Our next webinar will be the first ever candy category study, and it's scheduled for August the 15th. You can join us for this presentation where we'll be doing a deep dive into this very dynamic category. You can check back at our website, tabsanalytics.com, next week for that candy study sign up. As something new this time, we're introducing for these webinar series an option where we're going to provide a free 30-day trial to access the wine, liquor, and beer Nielsen category data via our QuickTabs Connect platform. And note, this is current live data, not sample data. Well, we've also launched the same platform for our candy category data in preparation for the next webinar. And you can sign up for this trial site via our website. If you click on the pivot stream, and then there's a solutions link, you can click on that, or you can just email us at info@tabsanalytics.com if you need any assistance. Presenting today is Dr. Kurt Jetta, CEO and founder of Tabs, as well as Tucker Malsh. He's our VP of Business Development. At the end of this presentation, we're going to open the floor to questions that you can submit via the chat box on your GoToWebinar screen. So with that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Jetta.
Thank you, Dustin, and thank you for all of those attending. And I think the vast majority of you are probably first-time attendees. Tabs traditionally has had very little involvement in the spirits and alcohol category, and that was one of the reasons we acquired a company called Pivot Stream last year, and that's where Tucker came from, and that's where he's joining us, and he's going to be adding his expertise to our discussion today. So I'm not flying solo like I normally do, but I'm going to talk to you first about the methodology. What's the data we're looking at? And with all our industry studies, it's the same type of data source where we're looking at consumer survey data, geographically, demographically dispersed. This is through a company called SSI, which is survey sampling, and they're a multinational research vendor. We talked to 2,000 adults 18 plus, and we did that in the end of May, early June of just this year. So very recent data. After we did this, because this is always our sample, the adults 18 plus, I forgot because I'm not involved with the category, the high sensitivity to even acknowledging that there's underage drinkers and purchasers of some of these categories like alcohol or cigarettes. So I'm going to go full Schultz on you. Say, I know nothing about these 18 to 20-year-olds that may or may not have responded to this survey. So that winnows us down to 1,901 adults 21 plus. So that's the sample that we're looking at. We weight these results by age and gender. So we know that through survey, it tends to underrepresent young males and older women. So we need to balance the population. Even though these suppliers do a very good job at getting there, there still needs to be a little weighting applied to get to the census averages. And the areas of question, this is a very straightforward survey we did because this is really the first one. This is where we lay the foundation of the knowledge, and hopefully we repeat this over the next several years and we can track behavior. But we asked what types of products they're buying, where do they buy these products, and then some particularly important attitudes towards cannabis, because a big industry topic, and Tucker, you're closer to it than I am. You've probably heard a lot of these questions and concerns.
Yeah, Kurt, thank you. So traditionally, the beverage alcohol industry has always looked across the 3 major categories. So beer, wine, and spirits, and examined where the share was shifting and what the trends look like. Over the last several years, for example, there's been a big shift away from beer, and wine and spirits have been growing significantly. It was always assumed that those same dollars would move across BevAlc, and it was all about the competition between those 3 categories. But things have changed. In the last couple of years, legalization of cannabis has really come onto the scene as one of the most frequently debated and hot topics. I've been attending alcohol beverage conferences, fielding questions from our current clients, and staying up to date with mentions in the trade publications. And there's certainly been a continued focus on cannabis and what impacts it might have on the beverage alcohol consumer. We're seeing a lot of fear, a lot of lobbying efforts around it, and uncertainty around how the broader use of cannabis will affect consumption. So I certainly look forward to exploring those survey results and finding out more later during this call. So with that, pass it on
talk about good timing too. I just read it's either imminent or it happened in Canada. They just had national law approving recreational use. And so that will also be a good bellwether to see. We'll get some better learnings on what happened in the US, but there's a lot of good information here that we'll review later on. Some of the technical issues we adjust for, we do a lot of internal and external validity tests. So for example, we make sure that the data we're getting as far as outlet purchasing habits or product type preferences align with other data sources that we know to be true. For example, Nielsen in market sales data. We also have a methodology because what we're trying to do is project to all outlets, not just the track channels, but e-com and specialty outlets and the corner liquor store and the specialty wine store. And so we have a methodology we call share of mentions. And you can go to our website, webinars.tabsanalytics.com, and look at a few of our earlier webinars where we talk about this methodology in more detail. But basically, we use this as a proxy for share of transactions. And that then is aligned very closely, again, with other sources we know to be true. And then with these areas of questioning, we slice it into geodemographic breaks by gender and age and income, et cetera, 8 census regions, and then the top 13 states. And why we pick 13 is because those are the states where we have a statistically significant sample where we can make some inferences. So let's get right into the data. How many people are buying? So basically, when we define BevAlc, it is only wine and liquor. And about 2/3 of the adult population, 21 plus, is purchasing it at least once over the year. Almost half are in each of the categories, 51% wine, 46% liquor. And if you buy wine at all, it's highly likely that you're a regular buyer. We define regular in this study by at least 3 times or more. Whereas liquor, there's a bit higher percentage of marginal buyers, those that only buy once or twice, but still 3/4 of the buyers of liquor are buying it at least 3 times. So, once you're in the category, for the most part, you're buying it quite a bit. In some categories, we see a very high percentage of those buyers are really occasional buyers. And so this is a different dynamic than we're typically used to seeing because we do these industry studies, and that's actually one of the values. Even though I don't have a lot of experience in this sector, when I get these results, I can provide some context to the other CPG categories we look at. So we look at nutritional supplements, we look at baby, we look at grocery, we look at personal care, a couple others that we've done over the years. So first of all, who's the buyer on age and gender? First of all, we see on wine, it's pretty much equal between men and women, both in the category, and these are regular purchasers, whereas liquor is more skewed to males. So males, 33% higher incidence than females, 41 versus 30. If we look at age, if we look at the red is the wine as we're going by age group, we can see that lower incidence in purchasing at younger ages, but once it hit ages 30, it's pretty much a consistent purchasing pattern as far as being regular buyers. Liquor, on the other hand, tends to skew younger, and then it drifts downwards slightly, and then once they hit age 60, the usage drops off and the purchasing drops off quite significantly. So 2 distinct profiles on age and gender between wine and liquor. Does that carry through to education and ethnicity? So I think the stereotype that people would have on wine is justified based on this data, meaning it's the realm of people with higher education and the high other kind of backgrounds, upscale backgrounds, and so you can see that that purchasing gets a bit higher the more educated. But there's also this correlation for liquor as well. So people that are better educated tend to be higher purchase levels than less educated people. And there's quite a significant ethnic skews in the category. So if you look at wine, among non-Hispanic whites, wine is much higher than liquor. Among non-Hispanic blacks, liquor substantially higher than wine. Hispanic and Asian are both fairly high. So there's not as big of a gap between the two categories. But all of this then, as we kind of build this profile, that helps us in our sales and our marketing efforts. And then we finally get to income. So there's actually where the correlation is even stronger. So the lowest all the way to the highest income, you can see once I get to the very high income, 250,000 and more, 2/3 of those people are in the category. And that number pretty much goes up fairly consistently with each income break. But again, you see that same correlation with the liquor. And Tucker and I were just speaking earlier about some of the high-end liquors, that are coming into the market. What are you seeing, Tucker?
Yeah, I think definitely we're seeing Diageo, for example. They've just, in the last few weeks, hired on a team of bankers to start looking to sell off some of their non-core, kind of lower priced products and really focus on the high-end premium that have the higher margins and would bring obviously more profits to their bottom line. So I think Diageo, a lot of the others are looking at doing that same thing, trying to obviously go to the higher income and focus on the brands that will bring more to the table.
Yeah, you really see that big marketing dollars really focused against those high-end brands, and it really is a consumer construct that they're appealing to because of that higher income skew. One of the most important things when you're in these categories, because they are so highly regulated, is to understand the distinct profiles by region. How do they differ? And so first of all, we look at wine. Now, does that surprise you, Tucker? Highest wine consumption or purchase in Northeast? What would you have said?
I would certainly have thought the West Coast with Napa, San Francisco, even Washington State and Oregon has such a high amount of wineries and everything else. So I certainly thought the Northeast was a surprise here on this one.
Yeah, and that's where we tend to stereotype kind of a very prominent demographic, because those strips of demographics are upscale and white and all of those other things. But there's a lot of people out on the West Coast, a very ethnic and a diverse, and a lot of economic disparity as well. And so when you look at the West in totality, which does include a lot of the mountain states, you get wine purchasing actually relatively low or significantly lower than, say, the Northeast. Liquor is pretty consistent across all of those areas. As we dig a little bit deeper into the 8 census regions, the interesting thing here is how the Mid-South pops. And the hypothesis for that is, Tucker?
I would definitely go with whiskey or bourbon for, Tennessee.
Wrong. So what might it be then?
I don't know. I think we'd have to look deeper at the data and see kind of what we can uncover.
Why, thank you for that totally impromptu and unrehearsed question and comment, Tucker. So what I'm going to do is get into our portion of our Bev alcohol tracker. And what this is, we can do is see how does purchasing skew by these 8 regions. And so I'm going to focus on just the liquor types here. I can look at overall liquor purchasing here. And so here you see that high mid-south. So that's where we're talking when we talk about that Kentucky. That is the heartland of bourbon. So he's not wrong in thinking that. I know that's what I thought. But if we click on whiskey, you can see it's actually not that. It's above average. See, very low in the North New England, low on the West Coast. But it's only above average. It's really kind of, when I looked at it, it really just seems to be the fact that they are above average in most of the types. So you can see brandy, they're above average, cognac, they're above average. And so that translates into generally just higher level of penetration overall. And so that's the important distinction. We don't just make decisions based on stereotypes and perceptions. We actually have the data now to kind of make better decisions on, is it purely driven by bourbon and whiskey, or are there other things? And the answer is the high incidence in the MidSouth is due to other things in addition to just the bourbon and whiskey dynamic. So as we look now at the top 13 states, now who'd have thunk it? I mean, again, everybody thinks it's California because of Napa and all the, a lot of media around wine drinking. But actually, New Jersey has the highest penetration by a lot. And I actually looked at the data yesterday. And now the name leaving. What's the Italian? There's some kind of really a highly ethnic Italian wine for maybe even cooking, Merlot, something. But there was a lot of open-end responses to that. And so I think, that came a lot of them from Jersey. But in general, there tends to be an upscale consumer base up there, because you also see, here's New York very high as well. And then liquor, again, maintaining fairly consistently across all of these large states, but wine, pretty big. And I mean, given the regulatory environment, correct me if I'm wrong, Tucker, but pretty much each state operates its own regulation with respect to distribution networks and other things, correct?
Yeah, each state is really its own animal, based on regulation, based on distributors. Oftentimes companies and suppliers are having to work with hundreds of distributors throughout the country. So it certainly have to have, their own strategy for each state. One thing that popped out at me on this one was, think if you're like a small wine company and you've launched in one area of the country and you're trying to determine where you should launch next. I think you can uncover some kind of gems in here where you should actually look and focus a little bit more. Or if you're already a bigger company, maybe put some more marketing dollars or other aspects behind it in some of those states.
Yeah, so one thing we'll do as we kind of do this, execute this study on a quarterly basis, is we can aggregate consecutive quarters. So we get a bigger sample so we can dig deeper. And so what's 13 states now, if we get the sample across 2 quarters, that 13 could go to 25, 26, and then we could get a pretty good view of the overall state level landscape. So now let's go to what are the most preferred wines. And number 1 is Merlot, 44%. Now there's been those out there that maybe have seen the movie Sideways, and Merlot not held in high esteem. But if I'm going to ask Tucker, let's play a little trivia again. Where's Merlot the highest penetration?
Once again, I would go the West Coast, Napa Valley, and all the associated.
Oh my God, come on, man. You've been in the industry forever. You got to know these things, brother. So I'm going to compare Merlot. See, actually, it's low. I mean, I think they kind of got on board with that whole Sideways movie. And if you haven't seen it, Paul Giamatti, made in 2004, highly recommended, great movie. But you can see actually New England very high for Merlot, the mountain states, the plain states. And let's compare that to, say, Cabernet. And so you see in the West Coast now, that's above average, 21% of the people buying. So you get a very good view with this tool right here. You can really understand the regional differences in the landscape. And what our final deliverable is will be is not only can you slice by region, but even demographic within regions. Wherever there's a significant sample, it'll all be visible in this tool. So one of the key things in wine, though, there's 10 of them that have a significant user base, meaning at least 20% of the category buyers are buying it. So that inherently leads to a lot of fragmentation. And, if you go to a typical, just a mass merchant, a mass market retailer like a Safeway, how many SKUs are you expecting to find on the shelf, Tucker? Give me a estimate.
I would say around 500 or so, a vast amount of.
Yeah, I mean, at least. I mean, when I go to my Publix, I live in Florida. I mean, it strikes me as there's thousands, but you start thinking about all these types and then regions and, price points and brands. I mean, it can proliferate quite a bit. But the foundation of it is, what's that core preference relative to size? And you see it's a mix of reds and whites all having a pretty significant user base. Liquor, by contrast, is a bit more concentrated. In fact, vodka, very high penetration among category buyers. So you see 6 in 10 people purchasing liquor. Whiskey, rum, and tequila also very high. This surprised me, gin at only 17, because it seems to me like we've been seeing a lot of really marketing activity in the gin space lately. I mean, is that what you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think the liquor industry especially is so cyclical in terms of what's hot. You know, a couple years ago it was tequila, certainly whiskeys came in very strong as well. And now gin is kind of the next hot item, you know, with Hendrix and some of the other ones that are, you know, just coming out now. But I think the one thing to remember about gin is compared to the other 4, the vodka, whiskey, rum, and tequila, gin is such a small base that they have a long way to go. So you're going to see high growth numbers, but it's still not close to the other top 4.
Yeah, it'll be interesting tracking this over time next year to see what's hot, what's growing, that type of thing. So now we get into attitudes, and specifically toward cannabis. So before I start looking at conclusions, let me walk you through what we're looking at. So we're looking at different groups. Each bar is different group. There's 2 questions. One is, we ask them to say, agree on a 5-point scale, 5 being strongly agree, I will drink less if cannabis or marijuana was legal. And then the second one is, I am opposed to the legalization of cannabis. And so if you said strongly agree, it means you're strongly opposed. So on the first step, I think the conclusion I get, because I'm looking at all adults, non-drinkers, occasional wine buyers, regular wine buyers, occasional liquor buyers, regular liquor buyers, on both the regular wine and liquor buyers, that's a pretty small number. And when you do this type of research enough, you know that the only thing that matters is what's registering on the top box at the extremes. And the fact that only 9% of regular liquor buyers saying they're going to buy less, I mean, it may hurt it at the margin, but that's a very small percentage of people that feel strongly that they're expecting to drink less. And if you're not saying you agree strongly, that means you're pretty squishy on the issue and you're probably not going to do anything, even if you agree somewhat. And then the other interesting thing, and this gets to, you know, kind of Canada just approved that cannabis for recreational use. I could not, because, you know, this is what you see on the page, but I looked for every demographic, every user profile. I could not find any type of meaningful constituency that was against legalization, strongly opposed to it. And if you don't have a strong constituency against it, most likely it's going to happen. It's some level form of legalization exists, I think, in, you know, several dozen states, and I think, you know, more are to follow. You know, I looked at it by age, by gender, by income, nothing. I mean, so the highest level was non-BevAlc purchasers, but all the others, you know, you just didn't have a lot of people that felt strongly against it. Then we ask questions just getting at wine category engagement, and here's where the context to other categories really helps. So when we ask these type of questions in, say, cosmetics or beauty or vitamins, if somebody is self-identified as a heavy purchaser, normally they're agreeing strongly with a lot of these statements at the 40% level or above. Like, I like to spend a lot of times in front of the cosmetics section. I find it's a way to engage. I really know my brands. When we ask those types of questions, we're getting in the 40s. Here, these engagement scores uniformly are low. So if I look at regular wine buyers, see, you know, I purchase high-end wines. I know the brand of wine I'm going to buy before I purchase. I have a big collection. All of these are below 20%. It kind of, the overall totality, the way I read it, is that for the most part, wine buyers aren't heavily engaged in the category. They buy it a lot. They just don't know about much of it. And that's when you have that type of consumer dynamic, that leads to intense fragmentation. There's really not a lot of brand power. There's some, you know, I know my favorite brand is Beringer Estates. That's what I started drinking 20 years ago, but that doesn't mean I'm exclusive to it. But I can probably count on less than one hand other wine brands. I could probably count on 2 hands, 2 feet, and bringing in another couple of hands, the number of hair care brands that I know. So it's really a much different type of dynamic. You see, in liquor, there's a bit more engagement with brands, and you see, it's kind of a chicken or the egg. What came first? Did more advertising behind it get that number up, or was there always an inherent buy-in on brands, and just now companies are investing behind that particular behavior? But all of these other engagement scores are pretty low. The thing that I found really, really interesting was the deal-seeking behavior being so low. Now, in most states, maybe all states, Tucker, there are prohibitions on discounting BevAlc. Is that accurate?
It is, yeah. There's definitely ways that the legality in terms of promotions and things like that. So I think brands have to be careful, but that did surprise me as well. I would think that people would come in, see things on deal, but it seems like either they're very loyal to their brands, or there's other reasons for it.
Right. I mean, and so again, for context, almost every other category we look at, that number is at least 50%. It's always the most important, attitudinal response that we get, regardless of what kind of things we put on there. So the fact that it's only 16%, and there's other ways to exhibit deal-seeking behavior. You can go to outlets where you can get a lower, better price. And so even though, say, a Trader Joe's or Costco is disproportionately developed, likely because of price, there's just not a lot of people's top of mind saying, hey, that's a major driver in, how I decide what and where to buy. So that has implications on, where people buy as well. And so what we're looking at here is where people buy wine. This is any wine purchase. It's not regular, but again, those two are pretty close to the same thing. But it, again, lends itself to this very high level of not only brand and item fragmentation, but outlet fragmentation. So you see, everybody thinks, oh, Costco has the most wine buyers, or they say number one in wine, but they don't have the most buyers. They may have the most dollars because you tend to have much higher transaction sizes there. And you look, they're the number 2. But here's Walmart, and that surprised me as well. I mean, they're number 1 in anything. Just, is there anything they don't dominate in the CPG space? It's crazy. But what you see here, again, for context, is the specialty channel is very strong and robust relative to all the other sectors where it's really under duress. And much of that, I would surmise, is due to the regulatory landscape. There's a certain level. In Northeast, for example, many states, you can't even buy any BevAlc in grocery stores, for example, or you have to buy it at a state store. So that lends itself to a high level of fragmentation, and also lends itself to the fact that a lot of people are buying in some of these, specialty outlets. 3 retailers that always get a disproportionate around, discussion because of their appeal to the vaunted millennials, is Trader Joe's, which is disproportionately high. We've got this $2 chuck, if you're not familiar with that. I think they truly, and maybe they don't sell it anymore, but I mean, they certainly get a lot of people in the door because ultra cheap, and I guess I hear it's pretty good wine. Whole Foods is, what you would expect. That's relatively where they are in grocery at 9% of the people buying. So that actually means that a relatively higher percentage of people are buying at Whole Foods, because remember, only half the people are in the category. And then kind of the pure play e-com non-store. So that's where Amazon is. That's where wines.com. And again, relatively low. E-com in general just isn't well developed in grocery overall. And it doesn't seem like it's that well developed in BevAlc either. Now, I kept the same sorting that we saw in wine that went from high to low, and kept it for liquor, so you could see what areas really stand out here. So first thing you see is that Walmart is below where it was before. It was number 1, still big, 20% of liquor buyers buying there. Costco, again, still big, but this other specialty, the corner liquor store, the specialty mom and pops, that is getting more than a quarter of the people saying they buy there. Here's ABC stores, which was particularly big in the South. 16% of the people saying they buy there, but again, a highly fragmented landscape. Grocers, when given the choice, a lot of people will shop at grocers. In fact, let's just see that in a little bit more detail. And so here we're looking at what is the share overall. This is of the total U.S., and let's just look at liquor. And this gives that share of transactions, share of mentions that we are. So the blue is, here's all the e-com business, is about 5% of the total. Specialty, a very big chunk. You can see how much of it is here. ABC stores, 11% of the mentions, really high. Let's now dig in a little bit by region and see how that regional profile changes. And this is about as dramatic of a shift in regional profiles I've seen in any category I've looked at. So if we look in the Northeast, where it probably has the highest level of regulatory environment, much more skewed towards specialty outlets. In fact, a quarter in this other specialty, ABC store, 16%. So the state store you'd see in like Pennsylvania would be in this other specialty. Here's Costco, number one for mass market. Walmart at a modest 3%. Most of them, they don't even sell liquor. So this gives you then a good kind of background in what outlets are most important by each of these regions. Now, it makes it difficult drilling in even further based on the samples we have. So kind of carving up 50 people in the Mid-South, you get a little bit tenuous on making some conclusions on market share. But over time, again, we can aggregate different waves of users to get that information to drill in further. This is the perennial question. If you're out there selling at retail, that your wholesaler customers, your retail customers, this is the question that they're asking is, how big's e-commerce? Where's the business? How big is a given retailer relative to the overall pie? And we have it here for both liquor and wine, both regionally and on a total U.S. basis. So given that, I can, glide over these next two pages, but again, this will be part of the leave behind, so you'll have this ongoing in hard copy, but you can see kind of the strong skews at the bottom, mass market, specialty, and e-com, how they differ. What I would expect is as regulatory barriers come down, you expect the purchasing profile to be more like what we're seeing in the Central and the West. Or maybe in the South. Really, Northeast is somewhat of an aberration relative to all the others. So South arguably is maybe most reflective of where things would net out without regulation. And then we have the same thing for liquor. And so let's conclude. What do we know about it? Well, let's get first of all, a buyer profile. So the wine, again, these are skews. Don't be oppressed by the tyranny of indices. Just because it skews higher for a certain group doesn't mean other groups are unimportant. But the wine buyer, more likely to be 30 or over, affluent, well-educated in the Northeast and white, whereas the liquor buyer tends to be younger, slightly more affluent and educated, skewed toward the Mid-South, and then ethnic. That said, the majority of liquor buyers are still majority white, but if you're trying to focus your marketing dollars efficiently, understanding those higher propensities help you spend more efficiently. What product types are people buying? So first of all, we see that 10 different types have at least 20% of the category buyers. That's a really high fragmentation of consumer preference. Liquor is a bit more concentrated. Vodka gets over 60% of the buyers. Whiskey, rum, and tequila, a good chunk at 35 to 45. There are significant regional differences by type, and that's some of the information that we showed on the maps as we were tiling around, and I was berating Tucker for his ill-defined knowledge of regional preferences, but I can guarantee you he'll know it like the back of his hand when we talk next year. So the Mid-South, again, don't be stereotyped. Get the knowledge, get the facts. Don't stereotype that Mid-South is high just because of whiskey. While bourbon is higher, above average, it's actually driven by preference for the secondary types. That's why that area is higher. Similarly, we stereotype California to be very high when it's not overall. Merlot is the most popular type of wine, but it's low in the West, high in the New England area. The outlets, this was the thing I found most curious. You really see the impact of regulation and alcohol distribution. So it creates this fragmentation, much more in this area than in traditional CPG. Also, there's the regulation of having to go through wholesalers. You can't go direct through to the retailers. Specialty outlets still seem to be popular. So even in what I call the lower regulation regions, the total wines are more. I mean, that's, strong share regardless of, what issues and barriers exist in a particular region. So there will be a propensity for that. And a lot of it has to do with the fragmentation and selection that these outlets can offer. E-com, not much of a force yet, roughly 5%, but we would expect, again, is kind of overall consistent with grocery. Particularly Walmart and Target have jumped way up. We've tracked in other sectors, and that has jumped overall penetration in e-com. So we would expect the same thing over time in this sector as well. Some of the notable outlets, Walmart and Costco are the top two chains. Total Wine and More, Trader Joe's with $2 Chuck, and the food chains are also significant players. Some of the attitudes. This is a really kind of, when I look at this, from a more objective eye, because again, I haven't had as much experience as Tucker or some of the other associates that came from Pivot Stream, but this strikes me as a very immature industry with respect to market structure and consumer attitudes and the importance of brands and the fragmentation and the relative lack of engagement. All of this strikes me as, kind of a fertile landscape to actually have more marketing dollars and brand awareness and investment spending. Whether that's viable given the overall profit structure of the supply chain, I don't have that much knowledge, but certainly you see that low brand awareness or knowledge in both sectors. Fragmentation we see in preferences and outlets, no strong brand affinities, liquor more than wine, minimal segment of users that are highly engaged pretty much in anything, and deals and really not even that big of a deal. So in most categories, deals are extremely important. It's kind of the one major overlooked consumer needs that marketers overlook, but here it just doesn't seem to be that big of a deal. So in this environment, the consumer behavior can shift dramatically. You recall Tucker talking about how tequila was hot and we had bourbon that was hot, 3-4 years ago. I mean, it almost on a whim or with a little bit of a catalyst, you can see these shifts. It's ripe for that. And that also means that point of purchase is very important. Share of shelf is very important. Just overall visibility, get in front of them. So the overall being visible at retail seems to have this disproportionate importance more than we see in other categories. And then with respect to the cannabis, I don't think it's much to get worked up over. Certainly this data suggests that it's not going to be that much of an issue. Certainly we'll track it over time, but it would be a marginal impact at best. Certainly nothing that will cripple the industry. So I did want to make people aware of a special offer for attendees. So Dustin mentioned the Nielsen data, but also these dashboards that I just showed, they'll be available for 30-day access once you sign up for the Nielsen portal, and that's that live BevAlc data through QuickTabs Connect that you can get it. So it's market level data, it's item level for all beer, wine, and spirits. So a lot of great data, great portal to get in. In fact, right now I'm going to toss it over to Tucker and have him take you through the portal and give you a little bit more of a demonstration.
Great, thanks, Kurt.
Hey, Tucker, if I could just interject.
Toss it back to me when you're done.
While you're getting ready, I want to let everyone know that, again, we're going to take questions after Tucker gives his demo real quick here. If you want to give a question over in the box over to the right, go ahead and send that now. And also the dashboards that Kurt mentioned, we'll provide that as a an ID and a password that you can just log in immediately. And then lastly, because I get this question all the time, we will make this PowerPoint available to you, to those that signed up. So we'll email that out to you most likely tomorrow. If you don't get that, you can email us back and we'll make sure to get that back out to you. Go ahead, Tucker.
Thanks, Dustin. Yeah, so as we talked about on the call, everybody, I think one of the most important things that we discuss is there's so many SKUs out there right now, and especially in wine, liquor as well. So category management has never been more important to try to differentiate yourselves when you're going into those retailer calls and discussing what the data is happening, not only with your brands, but what's happening with everybody else's brands, and how can you tell those fact-based selling stories to try to put together, that story to try to gain more shelf space, get more distribution, and then also understand what's happening from a velocity perspective as well. So the two major levers in alcohol beverages, everyone knows, is distribution and velocity, but you need the data to be able to tell the story. So we're fortunate enough to have partnered with Nielsen as a connected partner to develop a bunch of different solutions across alcohol beverage and wine, spirits, and beer. And as part of that, we do have these demo sites, which I'll show you today, and then we'll send you the links to sign up tomorrow via email, and you'll see it at the end of the call as well. But we have 3 individual sites. There's the spirits site, the beer, and the wine. Today, I'll just show you the spirits site. You log in. Here's what you're going to find once you get your username and password emailed to you. You'd log in. You'd see the homepage here. You click on reports. The structure is very much kind of like a Dropbox with folders. So if you look here, we can expand. Got about 20 or so reports for each one, and they cover the major topics. So, overall sales, rank report would show you by SKU, performance decomposition on one page is going to show you, once again, your distribution velocity, some of our proprietary metrics, including productivity, organic growth, which is the change in velocity. We also have pricing. We've got some advanced charting. So imagine that you get a call today and you need to pull a deck together for your retailer buyer at Target next week. We've got over 70 charts already created on here in the one-click sales call prep that you're able to access. And with that, I'll just kind of show you an example or two of each one of the reports. So if you click on here, here's what our interface looks like. We've got the slicers on the top. Each one of these slicers are going to have the Nielsen data, the Nielsen attributes. So if you look across, you can see, pricing, flavor, brand. On the top left, you'll see period types of the time frames, your markets. And once again, as Dustin mentioned at the beginning of the call, these are all live Nielsen data from the most recent 5/19/18 time frame. So really valuable stuff here. You're able to see exactly what's happening with your business for free for 30 days. Try out the platform. Another thing to mention is this is Microsoft Stack technology. So with a click of a button, you would go File, download a snapshot, and you'd have all this in Excel ready to work with, as well as pass on to your team via email or however else you choose to. So this one is just an overall category report for spirits. It kind of shows, the sales measures across and then goes through the categories. That's the sales reports, most of them same format. Here's one that goes through the manufacturers, same type of thing. This one is total US vodka. The other ones I wanted to highlight were the performance decomposition. I would definitely dig into this one probably the most. You can see on here, you've got at the very bottom, I'm not sure if it'll go through on my screen, but at the very bottom, there's an explanations tab. When you get to it, you'll be able to read exactly what each one of these means, including productivity or organic growth. So a quick example, you can see Tito's here is at 593%. Smirnoff is at 121%. So Tito's is 5 times as productive, or each shelf space or each position on the shelf is going to bring that retailer and distributor 5 times the amount of dollars for Tito's as it would for Smirnoff. So, a real life example, you look down at your brands, you'd see what your distribution is doing, which is equivalent SKU, and then you would go back and say, okay, well, these guys actually have a lot more distribution, but they're not bringing as much to that retailer based on the productivity. So, Mr. Buyer at Target, if you replace this with this, you're going to make 3 times the profits or whatever that might be. So this one's a very powerful one in performance decomposition. The rank report I mentioned has the SKU level information, same type of thing, but on the very far left, you're able to say, okay, what is our dollar rank, unit rank, distribution rank, and then velocity rank. So good way to pull out, a couple different slides when you're looking at your SKUs versus your competition. And then the final one is the one that I mentioned earlier, the one-click sales call prep, where we have over 70 different charts available for you to access really across all the different ways of looking at Nielsen data. So that's really just a brief highlight of the spirits site. I already mentioned we do have a wine and a beer site available. So if you can sign up with a landing page and then reach out if you have any questions.
Thanks, Tucker. Actually, I had a couple of questions about the steps to get to this. Would you mind going ahead and show the steps to sign up on tabsanalytics.com?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Just so people can see.
Sure. So you go to tabsanalytics.com. You then go to Pivot Stream. And then under Pivot Stream, you go to Solutions and you go to BevAlc Quick Tabs Connect. So you click on this, and then you can just get your 30-day trial here. And you then put your name, email address, and then click on Bring on Data. And at that stage, you should get an automatic email that's going to give you your credentials in order to sign up. And it'll also give you the location of each of the 3 sites.
Great. And then for the other site that Kurt demoed, and we'll put this information in our email to you. That's located at tabsinsight.com, and from there you can use the ID of webinar and the password of wine321 with a capital W. Again, we'll put that in an email to you, but just in case those that wanted to get out to that right now, you could do that as well. So let's move right on to the questions.
Hold on, toss it back to me, Dustin.
All right.
But wait, there's more. You liked what Tucker had to offer, but there's yet more stuff. So the dashboard I showed you will be kind of a small component of what we're starting a quarterly BevAlc tracker. And if you're part of this webinar and you've attended, you get 1 free quarter of that tracker. And so we're tracking not only types and outlets, but brand awareness, favorability, purchase on a quarterly basis, what types they purchase, where they purchase, and then all the kind of cross tabs. So the free quarter exists if you make an annual commitment, and we're talking fairly modest dollars per company. It's $4,000 per quarter. So the idea is to give broad visibility, broad usage of this survey data and get some greater visibility to the world, the all outlet world. So with that now, that will also be more information on that will come with the follow-up notes, but I'll open it up for questions. Dustin.